We have all heard of funeral potatoes, a Midwestern casserole commonly served at after funeral dinners. Funeral food, however, is nothing recent. It also existed during the Middle Ages and the Victorian era. Today we will be visiting both of these periods to investigate funeral cakes and cookies. Beginning in medieval Germany, corpse cakes were a key part of the commemoration process. After a body was washed and rested in his or her coffin, a linen was placed on top of him or her. A yeast dough was then placed on the deceased's chest. Once it rose, it was taken home and baked. The dough was believed to absorb some of the deceased's qualities. When it was consumed, it passed these traits on to the mourners that consumed it. The use of food and drink to absorb a deceased's qualities was also prevalent in Hungary. In Ireland, a tobacco version of the corpse cake was also popular. A bowl, such as the one pictured here, filled with snuff, was placed on a chest of a loved one, and at the end of the ceremony, all attendees were expected to take a pinch of it to use. Like the dough, the tobacco had the power to absorb an individual's qualities and transfer them to the living. In the late 1700s, funeral biscuits, also known as funeral cookies, emerged in Europe and in the United States. In England, the upper class enjoyed burying biscuits, ladyfingers as long and wide as hot dogs. These cookies were sponge-like and usually came in twos. Pictured as a wrapper that was discovered. It is a Victorian British ladyfinger funeral biscuit wrapper. This wrapper is from the year 1830. In the year 1802, a Yorkshire local wrote a letter that described the funeral cookie. Quote, "They had burnt wine and a paper with 2 biscuits sealed up to carry home for their families. The paper in which these biscuits were sealed was printed on one side with a coffin, crossbones, skulls, hacks, spades, hourglass, etc., sealed with black wax." As for the common people, particularly in colonial America, shortbread cookies were eaten. The cookies mainly came in 3 flavors: molasses, caraway, or ginger, typically resembling a ginger snap. A wooden stamping mold was used to press a death's head, heart, or cross onto the surfaces of the cookies. The cookies were then wrapped individually and placed on a tray. Pictured as a death notice, it was common to wrap cookies in death notices. Other wrappings often depicted biblical verses and poetry. On the path from the church to the cemetery, a woman would be holding this tray of cookies. On the other side, a man would be holding a tray of hot spiced wine. As mourners passed by, they would take a cookie and a wine. The cookie was to be dunked into the wine. This tradition represented honor, mourning, and remembrance. Funeral biscuits were so popular during the Victorian era that recipe books started featuring funeral cookie recipes. Baking companies also started producing funeral cookies. In modern times, we also have funeral cookies, but they don't really have the same symbolic meaning. What are some funeral foods that you are used to?